Welcome back, everyone. Man, am I absolutely thrilled to have you here for another edition of The Explainer. Today, we are setting the stage for a deep dive into what is, quite frankly, an absolute masterclass in 7th century asymmetric warfare. We're actually traveling all the way back to the year 624 CE, right into the harsh, unforgiving sands of the Arabian Peninsula, to examine an engagement that went way, way beyond a simple skirmish. It's just a fascinating look at how resource management, rapid tactical pivoting, and sheer psychological endurance can completely overturn the odds. I want you to consider this for a second. How did a vastly outnumbered force of just 313 men manage to completely change the geopolitical landscape of the entire 7th century? It sounds totally improbable, almost impossible, doesn't it? But as we analyze the source material today, you're going to see exactly how incredibly high the stakes were and how a handful of crucial leadership decisions quite literally shaped the world we live in today. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the economic trigger, the high stakes of trade. Then we'll move into a crucial council of war, discuss controlling the vital wells, examine morale on the front lines, break down the decisive tactical clash, and finally look at shaping a new empire. Starting right off with Section 1, the high stakes of trade, the economic trigger for the conflict. To really grasp this battle, we have to understand that this whole clash didn't actually begin as a quest for a massive open field battle. It began as an attempt to intercept a massive Meccan trade caravan. At the very heart of this conflict is a really staggering number, 50,000. That's the estimated value in dinars of the goods being carried by a Quraysh caravan returning from the Levant, which was led by the astute Meccan leader Abu Sufyan. Now, you have to remember, after migrating to Medina, the early Muslims had all their properties back in Mecca confiscated. So Muhammad's plan to intercept this incredibly wealthy caravan was essentially a strategy to recover that lost wealth and, to send a really powerful deterrent message to the Meccans. Basically, all the leading Meccan financiers had a major share in this venture, so they were absolutely desperate to protect it. When Abu Sufyan realized the danger they were in, he sent out a frantic call for reinforcements back to Mecca. And while he actually brilliantly rerouted his caravan to safety along the Red Sea coast, this incredibly hyped-up Meccan army just kept marching out anyway. And what resulted was a massive, massive tactical mismatch. I mean, just think about these numbers. You have a Muslim force of about 313 men, with just 2 horses and 70 camels, suddenly coming face-to-face with a well-equipped Meccan force of up to 1,000 men and 100 horses. Just consider the intense pressure both sides were under as they suddenly realized, wow, a full-scale battle is actually imminent. Which brings us to Section 2, a crucial council of war, forging unity under pressure. When Muhammad realized they were no longer just intercepting a lightly guarded caravan, but facing a massive, heavily armed military force, he faced this critical leadership moment. He needed absolute consensus. Well, the crucial challenge Muhammad faced really comes down to the actual breakdown of his army. The Muhajirun, the emigrants from Mecca, were only a tiny fraction of the force. The vast majority were the Ansar, the residents of Medina from the Khazraj and Aus tribes. Now, why does this matter? Because the Ansar's original pledge to Muhammad only committed them to defensive fighting within the actual territories of Medina. So to march forward into an offensive field battle out at Badr, Muhammad couldn't just give a military order. He needed their explicit, unforced buy-in. So he holds this council of war, right? And that's exactly where Sa'd ibn Mu'adh, speaking on behalf of the Ansar, delivered this totally pivotal response. He said, "We give you our firm pledge of obedience and sacrifice. If you were to ask us to throw ourselves into the sea, we will do that most readily." I mean, that is just a masterclass in leadership and unity. That one decisive pledge cemented the army's unity. They were no longer these fractured little factions. They were a single, cohesive force, ready to march forward against basically impossible odds. All right, moving into Section 3, let's see how this builds on the actual battlefield, controlling the vital wells, adapting tactics on the ground. In desert warfare, water management isn't just some minor logistical detail. It is literally the defining tactical choice of the entire engagement. Arriving at the Valley of Badr, Muhammad initially set up camp at the very first well they encountered. But, and here is where you really see adaptable leadership shine, a subordinate named Al-Hubab ibn al-Mundhir respectfully steps up and asks if this position was a direct divine instruction or just Muhammad's personal tactical opinion. When Muhammad confirmed it was just his own opinion, Al-Hubab suggests this brilliant 3-step plan. shift the camp to the well closest to the enemy, block off or destroy literally all the other wells, and then just hold a defensive formation. This would force the thirsty Meccan army to attack purely on Muslim terms. Muhammad immediately recognized how brilliant this was and pivoted the whole army. That single decision secured a massive resource advantage.
And that leads us right into Section 4, morale on the front lines, psychological warfare, and belief. Because, the psychological state of an army the night before a battle, that often dictates the victor before a single sword is even swung.
The sources note this really fascinating environmental factor. On the night before the battle, heavy rainfall just sweeps over the region. For the Meccans, who were camped down in the lower, sandy parts of the valley, the rain created these muddy, exhausting slopes that made movement incredibly difficult. But for the Muslims, camped up on firmer ground, the rain actually compacted the sand and provided fresh drinking water. And, more importantly, the Muslims firmly believed this weather, along with reports of angels descending, was a direct divine blessing for their cause. These deeply held beliefs dramatically fueled the Muslims' psychological morale, while all that mud physically and mentally exhausted the Meccans. So when the morning comes, it reveals a stark contrast in command presence. On one side, you have pure Muslim discipline. Muhammad spent the night in prayer, his men actually got a restful sleep, and they held strict formations under explicit orders not to strike until given permission. On the opposing side, total Meccan division. Their camp was just plagued by bickering leaders. A lot of them knew the caravan was safe, and they just wanted to go home. The Meccan commander, Amr ibn Hisham, who the Muslims called Abu Jahl, literally had to resort to appealing to honor, using threats, and actively shaming the different clans just to keep his reluctant, overconfident army from packing up their tents and leaving. So the stage is perfectly set for Section 5, the decisive tactical clash. Precision and discipline in battle. It is the morning of March 13th, 624 CE, and the two forces finally face each other in the valley. Okay, let's actually walk through the chronology of how this unfolded. The battle began with traditional Arabian one-on-one duels. Muslim champions like Hamza and Ali stepped forward and secured these swift, decisive victories against top Meccan fighters, which dealt an immediate heavy blow to Meccan morale. Next, the Meccans unleashed volleys of arrows. Then came the chaotic Meccan charge. But remember that discipline we talked about? Muhammad ordered his men to just hold their ground and absorb the initial charge. Only when the Meccans were thoroughly engaged and starting to lose momentum did Muhammad finally give the order for a fierce, coordinated counterattack, famously throwing a handful of pebbles toward the Meccan lines to signal the push. And as they launched that counterattack, the Muslim forces roared this battlefield rallying cry, Ya Mansuramit, O thou whom God hath made victorious, slay. It was just this massive surge of unified, disciplined energy against an understrength and totally unenthusiastic enemy. The Meccan lines promptly broke, men turned and fled. The intense combat really only lasted a few hours, wrapping up by early afternoon. It was a total rout. Which brings us to our final part today, Section 6, Shaping a New Empire, the Geopolitical Aftermath. Because as the dust settled over the wells of Badr, the immediate tactical clash was over. But a literal tectonic shift in Arabian politics had just occurred. When you look at the sheer disparity in the casualty count, it's just staggering. The Muslims lost 14 men. The Meccans, on the other hand, suffered roughly 70 killed and 70 captured. But, it wasn't just about the numbers. It was about exactly who was left on the battlefield. The Meccan casualties included their commander, Abu Jahl, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, and several other really prominent nobles. This Muslim victory effectively decapitated the veteran leadership of the Quraysh in a single morning. The sweeping implications of this were immediate. Literally overnight, Muhammad transforms from being seen as an outcast into the undisputed leader of a recognized, powerful city-state in Medina. Seeing this massive shift in the balance of power, surrounding tribes eagerly and openly began to ally with Medina. Meanwhile, back in Mecca, because so many senior leaders had perished at Badr, Abu Sufyan, who, remember, was safely away guiding that initial trade caravan, he becomes the chief of the Quraysh almost by default. This perfectly sets him up as Muhammad's primary rival and ultimately ignites a grueling 6-year war between the two factions. We started today by looking at this tiny underdog force of 313 men. And I really want to leave you with this final thought. How do the tactical decisions made over a single desert well continue to echo through centuries of history? I mean, from the critical necessity of team unity, forged in a tense council of war, to the clever management of vital resources, to the undeniable power of discipline and morale under extreme pressure. Badr isn't just some piece of ancient history. It is a timeless blueprint for high-stakes leadership.
Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this incredible material. Keep learning, keep analyzing, and I'll see you on the next explainer.